We put our energy towards adjusting the external circumstances of our lives. Things come together, they fall apart, they come back together, and so on. And we keep tinkering, but despite our best efforts, there always seems to be unfinished business. And then someone comes along with a teaching of meditation or Dharma, and we meet with a radically different approach to life. We stop trying to fix everything. We turn inwards and start to work with or play with perception. And then everything begins to change. Brought to you by Meditate with Ranga, Playing with Perception invites you to open to the theater of experience and play. Welcome everyone to Playing with Perception. And today I'm very excited because I have two guests that I really feel indebted to and really so much gratitude towards. So today we're joined by Willa Reid and Elizabeth Day, who I met last October on a 2-week meditation retreat at Cloud Mountain Retreat Center on the west coast of the US. And, you know, I've said this before to both of you, I think via email, but that retreat really changed my life. And I was reflecting today actually on how much in the Chitta is different, how much in my life and just my sense of things is different from that retreat. So really, I'm so grateful to be joined by both of you. And you know, I was thinking about what I wanted to say as an introduction, and I tend to be long-winded, so I wanted to be brief here. And just to mention that, you know, throughout the course of this retreat, there were so many times where I was sitting in the meditation hall and just feeling such a sense of awe and wonder at the teachings that were being provided. And I can sense maybe Willa might be uneasy with praise, but there were two things in particular that I remember. One was Eliza gave a teaching on the Buddha's first sermon, the turning of the wheel, one evening towards the beginning of the retreat, as I recall. And it's a story, a sutta that I've heard many times throughout my life, but something about what was shared really moved me. And I remember, you know, you spoke about the energy that was sort of, you know, that came from that first sermon, and how all the devas and the brahmas and throughout the realms of existence, you know, that was felt, and the earth quaked. And I felt such a sense of like how precious it is to be human in this world, in a world where a Buddha arose and taught, and it was so helpful. So I want to thank you for that. And there was also an evening in which Willa talked about some stories from her life, and in particular, one evening on a Vesak day many years ago, where she sat beneath the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, that really moved me. So these are just a couple things that come to my mind when I think of both of you, and I'll pause there. But thank you so much for joining me. And yeah, I'd love to start by just asking how things are going. What's new? You know, what's your day-to-day like since we last met?
It's a pleasure to be with you, Ranga, just to say.
Yeah.
Remember you fondly from that retreat. It does seem a long time ago from our present day life. What's your everyday life like?
Well, yeah, the Cloud Mountain's very dear to both of our hearts. It's a really beautiful place to go and practice. There's that the kind of holding field is so present, beautiful trees, the way the team at Cloud Mountain look after things. So yeah, it was really lovely to be there with you and the others, and to be able to really reflect on the Dhamma in such a supportive place. And right now we're sitting in our own meditation place, and that's really beautiful too. So now lots been happening in terms of Dhamma practice and in terms of our own lives. You know, my dad's been very, very unwell. is now improving, and Eliza's been overseeing her mum. So we're kind of weaving our Dhamma, allegiance to the Dhamma in with our duty to family, to our lives, generating a livelihood.
Yeah, I'm just back from visiting my family in Australia. I have work that I do that keeps me busy. And here we are in autumn or fall, so it's starting to get a little bit cooler. But it's just at that moment where the trees are turning and there's a lot of beauty around, which is a kind of a way of, like an anesthetic to ease into the cold months ahead.
Well, thank you for catching me up, and I hope both your families are doing well, and whatever health issues are there, I hope they, are taken care of quickly.
Well, my dear old dad got COVID pneumonia, and I spent a couple of weeks in hospital. What was really remarkable is just see the amount of care he got, and just the amount of work that's happened in the whole planet, really, that the knowledge of how to look after him was so advanced. And you thought, wow, just to be in a field where you can actually bathe in the collective inquiry that's gone on, even just on something like a health thing. It's just so, yeah, he's doing well. He's back in his own house. It'll be a while till he's working in his garden again, but precious.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that he's doing a bit better. And yeah, what you shared, it reminds me of the last time I was in a hospital and I had surgery, and it was a not a big procedure, but throughout the course of 24 hours, I remember counting that there were 30 people in total that did something for me, and just feeling such a sense of gratitude, and being taken care of. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Interesting you say that, Ranga. I was in hospital last year for a minor procedure too. It was actually to have a little skin cancer removed and a skin graft put on. So I was lying there, and the surgeon's kind of looking down on my face, and I'm looking up at him. And I said, I'm so glad when you grew up you wanted to be a surgeon. There are people who can do this, and that there's an anaesthetist somewhere in all of this as well. So, because that's when one of the places you can really feel your physical vulnerability, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And the interdependence with others, the goodwill of others.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny how in life you can start to see Dhamma everywhere, right? It's one of the beautiful things. Yeah. Great. Well, to start, as you know, I have a few quick questions on your favorites. So actually, well, let's start with your favorite sutta. I know this is really difficult, but if you could, tell me about a favorite sutta and maybe why it strikes you.
So I guess I have to say the Anapanasati Sutta, if I had to just pick one, because it has the whole, most of them have the whole path there, but it's so profound, and it's such a profound practice path into really deeply understanding the khandhas, the way the sense of me arises, understanding perception, feeling, form, consciousness. So, and it's something I'm working with every day. But of course, there are thousands leap to mind. Like if you ask me, in a way, one of my favorite is the Discourse on the Elements in the Pot of Shed. And it's 146 in the Majjhima, and that's because it's so beautiful. It has this profound sense of what it was like to be in the presence of the Buddha, and the kind of compassion of it, and then the teaching, on the kind of foundations of peace. Wow. But yeah, and then of course the Sunyata Sutta, and I could go on and on, really, because there's such a wealth, and at different times they're powerful medicine for what's happening in my own heart, mind, chitta. So, but yeah, it's a bit like, what's your favourite food? Well, it would have to be rice, wouldn't it? It's a bit, what's your favourite food? It would drink, it would have to be water. You know, these things that are just the foundation of what you eat and drink. And I'd say Anapanasati is a pretty foundational discourse, along with the turning of the wheel of Four Noble Truths. But yeah. Eliza.
Well, you know, I'm an enthusiast. So whenever I'm asked about a favourite, I have this kind of crash of hundreds of things going on.
It's a game we play. I'll say, what's your favourite song?
And it's agonising. Response takes a while, so I'll keep this one for you. But you know, when Willa talks about the Anapanasati Sutta, it's like, oh yeah, of course that's a sutta, because it's just the, I don't know, I don't want to say the bread and butter. It's the centre of my practice as well. I forget to think of it as a sutta among many. But when you ask that, there are about 4 or 5 that jumped in at the same time for different reasons. The Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, because you mentioned that earlier, is just, there's just something about the power of that. It has all of the teachings in it, really, doesn't it? And it's this generativity and the hope and the possibility and the sense that we're all absolutely connected into, well, there are these world systems that are all moving in this generativity and you know, a sense of what the goal is and how it's possible, and the celebration, you know, of the first of the 5 who gets it, you know, and so on. It does really stir me into my blood and bone. But there's also Sariputta's teaching to Anapanasati that's, again, got all the teaching in it. And there's something for me, I'm a lover of precision and clarity in the teachings. It's actually what drew me to the Theravadan. I'd also been to some teachings, some Zen, some Tibetan teachings, Vajrayana, all of them beautiful in their own way, but there's something for me about the clarity and precision. And that sutta has that power and beauty, and the love of Sariputta for Anapanasati comes through, and the compassion and the possibility as you're you know, leaving this birth, you know, as death arises, what to, you know, how the focus can make all the difference. So there's something about that. And even the after part, the epilogue of that sutta, where the Buddha sort of tests them, you know, tests Ananda, I think it is. The Devas have said, you know, there's this light of extraordinary light and beauty in the assembly, and Ananda guesses that it was Anapanasati. There's something about how all of that works together, the kind of personal elements of these stories, the legacy of someone like Anapanasati with his goodness, and so on. There are so many suttas. The ones, you know, Angulimala, where the Buddha's profound heart qualities enable him to just stop in the face of this, you know, mass murderer, and really walk his talk, and the profound effects of that. So those are a few. On a different day, perhaps there'd be a different answer.
Yeah, it's so lovely just to sit here and listen to both of your reflections on these suttas. And actually, I have a follow-up question for each of you on what you just related. In terms of what stuck out to me, Willa, when you're talking about the mindfulness of breathing sutta, you know, for our viewers who may not be familiar with that term, you spoke about the sense of self arising. And I think that's maybe something that's not always apparent to folks as they read that sutta, not always apparent to me. So could you maybe explain that a little bit?
Well, in a way, the whole sutta is taking us through a process, yeah? A process of letting awareness collect inwardly and rest into the loveliness and life-giving properties of the breath, yeah? Because we know the Buddha's understanding of the power of breath meditation arose from his remembering the natural experience of this under the rose apple tree as a young boy, and the tremendous sense of happiness and well-being. Yeah. So the whole sutta is predicated on an understanding that breath is a natural experience that arises. Yeah, it's not something you have to do or get. And the way the sutta is laid out is the sense of establishing kind of uprightness, a presence here and now, establishing mindfulness, a sense of mind is completely present here and now. Now, for many of us, that might take 5 or 10 years to get to that place, yeah? So it's a process. And then the capacity just to be here and actually with the awareness completely receptive, knowing that breathing is happening. And in this process, because there's tremendous letting go of self in that. We've already been asking about all greed and grief for the world, yeah? Even temporarily. So the way we usually spin experience, that's been put down at the time of this practice, and we're just present, allowing this natural process to deepen a sense of well-being, for the awareness to come flat, to come out of fragmentation and stress, yeah? So it has this process of really softening and coming out of leaning out, getting, having, grasping into coming upright in heart, just here, receptive. Yeah, so this experience itself is already softening. And we're asked to understand what conditions the body, which is the breath. So we see the experience of the body is actually, it's not us, it's actually a conditioned experience. And this same understanding of process and conditionality is woven through the whole sutta. What conditions the citta, our relationship to feeling and perception. So they're not there explicit, they're in the implicit experience of it, in the sense that we're working with the conditioners of the body, with the conditioners of the citta, and then with the nature of awareness itself. Yeah. And as we see the conditionality, that the experience here in the heart is affected by the feeling and perception, like we're asked to really come into the loveliness of the breath, the life-giving properties of the breath. And not focusing here, but into a whole receptivity. We start to see that this experience that I thought was me is actually a conditioned, shifting experience. Yeah. And on and on. I mean, at the end of it, of course, the Buddha says that one who has understood this has understood the 5 khandhas, really has understood the full foundation of mindfulness, has really brought fully into presence the practice of enlightenment. And so the sense that this is a whole powerful process. And in it we understand form, feeling, perception, the kind of intentional qualities of the mind, and consciousness, awareness. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's a lovely place to sort of start this interview. Yeah, thank you. And Eliza, one of the things that really stood out to me listening to you speak about the turning of the wheel, the Buddha's first sermon, you talked about this, seeing the goal and feeling the possibility of it. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot lately about how so many people may not have that goal in mind, or really have some sort of clear picture of what that goal might be, even any way of really conceiving of it. And then moreover, how the possibility of it seems to be something that people are losing faith in, and I imagine this, at least in my experience, some people, and I went on retreat at a monastery for a few weeks after our retreat or your retreat, and there was a sense of some of the teachers not having faith in lay people attaining to this, this goal. And so it's been something that's been in my heart a lot. Is like, how possible is this? I have a lot of faith in that, but I feel that so many Buddhists around the world sort of don't. And I was doing some market research or a friend of mine was doing some market research for me when I got into this meditation space. And according to what we read, Asian Americans were less likely to practice meditation than any other demographic group in America, which actually lines up with my experience with Sri Lankan Americans, for example. Anyway, that was very long-winded, but maybe you could say a few words about that idea of the goal and the possibility of it, and how you read that sutta.
Yeah, sure. I'm just sitting with some sadness hearing what you're describing, actually, and some bewilderment around some of the teachings that actually, rather than pointing to the goal, lead away from it, perhaps, or diminish one's conviction that this is possible. In my life, I've been more trained in the humanities, and I've been less task-oriented or goal-oriented. So what I'm about to say may sound odd in that way, but without the goal, I don't see the point of practice. There'll be short-term benefits for sure, and maybe some longer-term benefits, but this path is on the one hand, it's simple in its conception, but it's not easy necessarily, is it? It's not easy at all. And so what helps us get through the peaks and the troughs and the plateaus and then the troughs of our practice, if not a sense of the possibility? And sometimes we get that through people that we're around who we've seen enough to know that their practice is fruited. We can be inspired by that, or from a taste, one's own taste. In the Theravadan teachings, there are these 4 stages, aren't they? And so our teacher Ajahn Chah has said in various ways that if you've been practicing intensely and with sincerity for about 5 years, you would have had every chance of at least entering the stream of Dhamma, the first stage. Not only is it possible, there are people all around the world who've experienced these stages, and so doubt is one of the hindrances, right? And doubt is resolved variously by engaging in the teachings and the practice and being around wise friends and inquiring. So if we're around people who are undermining a sense of our capacity to reach the goal, then it's really important to rethink where we place ourselves. I think there's a lot at stake. In the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, if that's about nothing else, it's about precisely the hope of that, that sense of the reflection on impermanence, on the khandhas, on not self, and then Thaniya gets it. He's got it. It's been transmitted, because we know when the Buddha, after the Buddha's awakening, as he's moving towards the Isipatana, the deer park outside of Varanasi, he runs across, or he walks, he walks past I guess an Advaita practitioner, some kind of wanderer, and kind of says, I'm a Sammasambuddha. But when he's asked why are you so luminous? What have you been doing? Well, as it happens, I've just awakened completely. And this wanderer's like, yeah, okay, well, go well. So then by the time the Buddha gets to his 5 ascetic friends who'd rejected him when he changed tack in his practice, he's intent on sharing this. He's been invited by the Deva out of compassion to teach. It wasn't his first movement. I know you know all of this. And so anyway, with this compassion in his heart and the connection and bond with those practitioners, they've been through very hard times together, he starts to teach them, and Kondañña gets it. I mean, that's the beginning of setting in motion the wheel of Dhamma. You know, it didn't take long for Kondañña to get it, and it didn't take long for the others to get it to the point of stream entry, and then to the point of arahantship. So, of course, it's not about measuring how long it takes, and we don't have necessarily a some Buddha around at the moment to be with, but we have the teachings. We have teachers who have awakened to at least one of these stages. There are examples in the forest tradition of arahants. I take a lot of inspiration from their practices, the practices of people around me. But I guess we've got to ask ourselves again and again, you know, what is this? What is this birth? Those very existential questions that a lot of us have when we're children, actually, even if we don't have, you know, the kind of discourses and frameworks for posing them, we sort of have this internal sense of what the hell is this all about? How did I get here? What's it for? I remember that very strongly when I was about 8 or 9, sitting on the end of my bed. I had a little coloured keyboard beside me, and I had a wig on. I must have felt like a Beatle or something, one of the Beatles. And but that was all. I put all that aside, and I could just see myself sitting there going, So the first humans, okay, that's okay. So where did they come from? So anyway, at some point, let's assume they're humans. And what do they have? They have nothing. They've got, what do? What are the first things they do? Get clothes, get food, get shelter. Then what? You know, and that question stayed with me. It's like, what do you do and why? What moves or motivates you to do whatever it is that you do? How did we get here? What's working? What's not working? You know, I think there's a level of sincerity that's needed in the inquiry, and then, you know, trusting where trust is well placed. One of the things that really supported me, and I know it's the same for many people from a Western mindset, is that this isn't asking, we're not being asked to believe anything. It's try it out, try it and see. And you do, don't you? You start to practice and you start to see some results, you know, with generosity. You start to feel everything opening up a bit. You know, with practicing the precepts, you start to feel a kind of deep wellness, and a feeling of all rightness, of goodness. And that is, you know, generative of the path. And, you know, you cultivate, and even if for a moment you feel a bit of peace and ease, oh, okay. And so you start to follow, you start to keep going with it. In the suttas, there are so many suttas where the Buddha reflects on the stage of awakening of the person who is just taught. I'm no fundamentalist, but I'd find it hard to believe that all of this isn't possible if I'm taking these teachings to heart, practicing them, finding they work. I don't even begin to understand how the goal, how Nibbana, the possibility of complete freedom from suffering, and disappear from teachings. I'm thinking about people who are doing the teaching. As to the predicament of South Asian Americans, Sri Lankan Americans, it's sad to hear that they practice meditation the least when it's such a heritage in Sri Lanka. And when I first started to practice, it was with Sri Lankans. And they brought me up in the Dhamma, these older Sri Lankan people who were so sincere. And when we went to a pilgrimage to India and onward to Sri Lanka, where our teacher had been, had headed up the forest hermitage there in Kandy. He took us to some caves and some areas where he had practiced. And I remember doing some chanting at Anuradhapura, is that what it's called? Sorry, I've forgotten the name of it.
Anuradhapura.
Anuradhapura, thank you very much. And some of my Sri Lankan, you know, Dhamma friends chanting so beautifully. And I said to them, it's going to take to learn how to do this chanting. You've all grown up with it. How wonderful. And they said, well, we grew up doing it rote. So some of us didn't know what it meant until, very recently coming to Australia, because the rest of us were wanting to know it in translation. So I guess there's something about the benefits, and I see parallels with Christianity in Eurocentric countries. There are benefits as well as losses of having a long-term entrenched priesthood, where the hierarchies can mean that knowledge and practice belongs with one group. I don't know if that reflects at all the situation for Sri Lankans in America, but I'm just hoping that now that there's some market research done and some interest in that there's some interventions and support, because I think coming out of Southeast Asian Buddhist countries, East Asian, South Asian Buddhist countries, there's a lot more ground for picking up the practice and going deeply in.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very moved by what you shared, and I'm glad you gave a shout out to the Sri Lankans in a positive manner, so that they could.
We both. I mean, all my Dhamma practice, same with Eliza. It's been out of the generosity of the Sri Lankan, the Thai, Lao, Cambodian. On and on, those who have a traditional love and appreciation of the teaching have meant that there are monasteries, there are practice places. So we're deeply indebted to these communities. And fortunately, here in New Zealand and in Australia, I think you get a different stat. I think within the Sri Lankans, I know the love of the Dhamma is really alive and well. So,
I have an image of Ranga. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
It's a silly image, really, of a childhood storybook of the king sitting on a pile of gold. Where am I going to get a few bucks? It's like raised in Buddhist countries, sitting on this pile of gold. It won't take long to find the inheritance and spend it well. Use it well.
No, I love that image. Yeah, and it's interesting because I also am in debt to so many Sri Lankans and uncles and aunties who helped bring me in contact with deep Dhamma. But there's also a sense, and Eliza used the word sadness. Like I have this sadness knowing that so many people that I know don't feel that Nibbana is a possibility for them in this lifetime. Who don't maybe even feel like Samadhi is necessarily a possibility for them in this lifetime. So there's, there's a devotion, faith, but yet a sense of maybe the next birth, so that makes me sad. And but I also know there's so much beauty in the community, and I have a lot of hope, and that's part of why I'm doing this whole project.
And to pick up on what Liza's saying, I think one of the problems and one of the things we were very aware of, both in the monasteries coming out of them, is that one of the big dangers is you get the sense of there are those who know and those who don't. And in a way, what I imagine is one of the ground for what you're talking about is the sense that there are those who hold the knowledge and have the capacity, and we're looking after them. And the work of all of us is to see actually the Buddha gave us all the Four Noble Truths. And we know in the suttas, lay folk were waking up all over the place in their thousands.
And that continues today. It's the thing about what I find so beautiful about it, and going back to what Willa mentioned when talking about the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha as an ascetic getting to the point of near death, and just remembering that time under the rose apple tree during the harvest time, harvest ceremony, festival, that natural process of just being with breathing, coming back to the natural state of mind, as Upasakaki calls it. And it's, and from there, his practice unfolded. Of course, he'd done a lot of preparation, hadn't he? But over lifetimes, but the recognition that there's a setting in motion, there's an organic process. It's not like each of us individually has to work this out conceptually or have some magical good, grace bestowed upon us. It's an organic process, and once you start to put it in motion, it unfolds. Does require persistent effort, but it doesn't require any special talent or any special status. I mean, the Buddha, as far as we can discern from the suttas, that the Buddha was working against the cultural entrenchments of caste in his day. One is not born a Brahmin, but by one's actions becomes a Brahmin, becomes noble. That was radical back then, wasn't it? We could say the same thing here. One isn't born into monasticism or born into any awakened state. One, through one's actions and through one's practice, awakening is the possibility. So it's not about social status whatsoever, or roles or power or authority. In fact, on the contrary, at times, you could say.
Yes, and this is part of one of the things I wanted to get into with both of you, the possibility for lay people, and Eliza, you were talking about how without the goal, A, it's like, why are we doing this? And B, how far do we really go? And I really feel that conceiving of these goals that are very lofty, but to not put them as far away, sure, they might take effort, they may take a lifetime, maybe more, but somehow they're still possible. I feel that that's really important. And I also have sense for me how the image that I hold of an awakened being is so important. And if that image, for example, is wearing robes and has a shaved head, and I'm not that, then that again serves to put that distance there. And yeah, so I for me, when I think about Asian Americans, I think that's part of it, is this sense of I'm not a monk, and so therefore some of these attainments, even samadhi, is not available to me. And I really, really just don't feel that that's right. Which takes me actually to something that Willa said and on retreat. And I remember the first time I heard it went straight to the heart and felt like she was speaking directly to me. And my nature is usually to ask, like, hey, can you explain what you meant by that? But for this one thing, I haven't asked. And that's allowed it to really flourish and grow for me. And that one statement was, feel your authority in relation to this process of waking up. Which even as I think about that, it's been such a protection as I've gone forth and received other teachings, to feel my own place on that path. Maybe you can hear it in my voice, how moved I am. So yeah, maybe if there's anything you want to say on that, and where you came up with that.
Well, yeah, it's like we talk about goal. I find it a tricky word because we're actually talking about a process of letting go of what does not belong and does not help, and it's not true. Yeah, and if we recognize that it's not about accomplishing something so much as letting fall away what is harmful and unhelpful. Yeah, it has a totally different feeling in terms of our own capacity. It is possible for me to recognize, hey, this particular way of being or relating to experience is just bringing more confusion, and to let that shift. Yeah. And that authority thing for me is really important for each of us to know, because it's about the first of the spiritual faculties, which is a sense of, it's saddha, which leaves that energy for the practice of confidence or conviction or sense of capacity, leading to the energy for the practice, which allows mindfulness to become fully developed, mind collect and gather and have the capacity for deep seeing. Yeah. So the first of that is to have that sense that, as Liza is saying, and we're here in the Dhammacakkappavattana, the first sutta, it is possible. It is possible to let go of what gets in the way. And the other aspect of that, it's not only possible, but it's possible here. Yeah, that we each have that capacity. And what I see a lot, particularly amongst the lay community, is the sense of, well, maybe some other time, some other place, somebody else, yeah? But actually there is only now, and there is only here, and there is only this chitta in this moment that I'm in contact with. And I have this strong sense that I often say to folks is, you don't know who you are. Yeah. So we read about Buddha, Sariputta, Moggallana, these beings, lifetimes of cultivation. But unless you have the capacity, you don't know your own. Yeah. You may get glimpses of it in terms of the, what you've become attracted or attuned to, or where you find yourself, what resonates with you. But you don't know. And maybe, Ranga, you've spent 40 lifetimes, 100, 1,000 lifetimes inroads practicing. Yeah. So it's, to me, it's to loosen up the sense and to go, well, in this moment, can I be with what is happening? Do I know what is happening in this chitta? And from that, yeah, then I can discern, is what somebody else saying true, helpful, and experiment with it. Because what I've seen over my years is people give their power away all the time in everything. And unless you're sitting in your kind of uprightness and strength, then yeah, you're not capable. Because you're kind of leaned over, you've given your authority away. And so I'm very pleased to hear, to whatever extent you might have given it away, you're taking it back. Because you need it.
This is a practice that's about coming into what's true, isn't it? And Willa's point about a goal, I mean, that's right, these are all words and language that we use, but there's what I find again and again is there's the importance of humility in the practice. So true authority and humility actually go together, don't they? If you want power over, forget it. It's not going to take you anywhere. If you give your power away equally, it's, you're losing capacity. But this sense of humility is what allows a kind of moving toward, if you want to put it that way, toward the goal without it being tendentious, without some sense of, I want to get there. I want to be an arahant. I want to be something, because of course that's, paradoxically, wanting to be something, of course, never gets you to be something. At least in the sense of awakening, it's there. But there is a longing, and the longing. I mean, I would have said the Buddha had a longing to finally find the end of suffering. Or you could call it motivation or conviction or faith, but something had to propel him out of the palace, out of his caste, into the life that he chose, where he's nearly dying from living on either literally or metaphorically a grain of rice. Something has to propel you to see the predicament that we're each in and the way out. So it's a different orientation than I want to be a great spiritual being, or, you know, some sense of attainment or identification. It's that fine balance, I believe, of a kind of base, coming in touch with one's base goodness and well-being, a recognition of the predicament of that there is suffering, access to the teachings that we all have, that suffering has a cause, suffering ceases, and there's this pathway. That's enough. That's enough to get going. And, you know, for very few people is the path swift and delightful. So it's often in those sort of byways and low ways and no ways and dead ends that we can start looking around for excuses, or, well, they can do it, but I can't, or, wrong path. Why don't I go back to sitting on the couch with a beer, you know, because that at least, you know, whatever. It's when it gets tough, I think, that it's really important to have wise friends around to keep the supports going.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, a question that's arising as I listen is from my own practice. I remember after being on retreat with the both of you, feeling, you know, just such a immense the beauty of a new level of samadhi in my practice, and just kind of swimming with this pleasure. And it lasted for a couple months. And then I remember at some point a deep sadness arose in me, and there wasn't any sense of a because or a reason. It just arose. And I remember first thinking like, oh, I thought I was past this. You know, but actually what I found is, for me, as I see it, there's when the sadness, and for me sadness is particularly an emotion, a flavor or hindrance that I don't like, or at least in my history have not liked. But now it feels like when these things arise from me, they're sort of calling me to let go more, to open deeper. And my question is around, does that ever end, or is this an accurate conception of the path, that somehow we over time learn to be more fully present with these things that are difficult? Or is it more of a path in which these things actually don't deepen, like sadness doesn't deepen, and it becomes weaker and weaker gradually over time? I'm curious to hear your conceptions, your experience on the path.
Well, I can give what might even seem a paradoxical answer. The capacity to be present with what is here gets greater and greater. The heart gets more capacity and possibility. And, you know, I was talking to someone yesterday that I find the metaphor the Buddha gave about suffering, and a teaspoon into a glass tastes very salty, but a teaspoon of salt into a lake is hardly discernible. So part of what's being cultivated is this, particularly through the Brahma Vihara, through really understanding that loving kindness, compassion, joy, evenness of heart are fundamental ground for the practice. And as these become more the dwelling places, then this teaspoon of suffering, dukkha, doesn't shake and stir in the same way. It can be discerned, but it's just like the heart can come around it in a fuller way. It's just sadness arises depending on condition, Sharon. And there are desperately sad things going on, yeah. And even the fact that the heart's become more receptive and less armored can mean that it actually can taste it more. but it has more capacity with it. But it's less personal. It's not about me. It's I had a very powerful experience once teaching years back, and we're in IMS, and there's 100 people more sitting in the hall, and just sitting there, and I think I was there, Ajahn Chah was, I'm not sure if I was talking or he was teaching, or I'll have to call one of us, but I just felt, whoa, all the sadness coming through, and it's just a recognition of whose is it? In this field, there's all kinds of stuff going on, and just that not taking it personally, but actually knowing it in the body, letting it wave through, finding out what it needs, just not coming into contention with it at all. It's arisen. I may not know the conditions, and it's not a problem.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very helpful.
Yes, sadness, when you mentioned sadness, Ranga, I really resonated with that. Sadness is something I'm very familiar with. And I would not consider sadness a hindrance at all. You know, of course, what we do with it when it arises, then that can be, we can hold it with ill will, wish it away, judge ourselves, and then there's the hindrances. But sadness arises. There are many causes and conditions for sadness in this world. And what resonated for me was that I also had an experience after a retreat that focused on Anapanasati back in my early 20s and late 20s, sorry. And after it, I had this, well of sadness arise for a while. After, I was quite disappointed because I thought people talk about all these fruitings after a retreat, or things flow and go well, and there'd been a little bit of that, but then this inexplicable sadness. And what I could say now is that can be a real seasoning, and it can deepen into this predicament and really turbocharge the motivation to free up. But I also think, and Will was saying this in a different way, really, that we start to sensitize more and more with our practice. So you might say, unfortunately, we can find ourselves more permeable, more able to receive the kind of collective suffering in the field. But we also have then the tools and the developing skills to work with it.
Yeah, thank you both so much. It's really helpful. Yeah, both responses are very helpful for me. And yeah, let's go into your life stories a bit. I'm curious. I'm curious to hear about your childhoods, and yeah, anything you want to share, maybe a memory from childhood that can arise for you now as you put your mind to it.
I have one. I mentioned earlier that existential kind of phase that never really stopped when I was about 8 or 9. But my very first memory, you could say verbal memory, there were kind of images before I was verbal, but when I was about 2.5 or 3, is actually of being in a Buddhist temple, which for Australian girl is quite unusual. But my family were based in Singapore, and my parents took us to a Buddhist temple. And I remember just this awakening fascination. There was someone who's just seemed ancient to me, with very lined face, sitting in what I now know to be in meditation. And there was just this beautiful composure. And I remember kind of padding up to them and looking up at their face like this, and they opened their eyes, and this wash of love just swept right through me.
Wow.
And their Metta, as I now know it to be, and a monk came over and sprinkled us both with water. And my mother has said many years later, I blame, and she does say blame. I blame that priest who sprinkled you with water for becoming a Buddhist. Well, when I went a long way from home to ordain, she's fine with it now. But I don't, because what really impacted me wasn't the monk sprinkling us with water. It was that person. It was an old lady with her practice and that metta. So that's a very strong, beautiful memory I have that often comes up when I'm sitting.
Thank you for sharing. Willa, anything for you?
Well, at that kind of age, I grew up in a small milling village in a kind of backwater in this country, so even a backwater for this backwater. But at that young age, I just was naturally sitting under trees, meditating essentially. That's why I had this strong sense. We don't know who we are. Came in with just this love of sitting by myself under trees, just feeling what felt like the love pouring down, and really seeing experience falling away from the present moment. So a very strong sense of actually what it's like just to be kind of fully embodied, kind of elementally present with other elements, natural elements. So I had, there was a lot of loss in my early childhood, and what we fortunately had was a beautiful Buddha Rupa. And at that age, I just used to sit and think, well, the Buddha's still happy. Because the Buddha had this beautiful smile. And so from that young age, I always had the sense that somehow the Buddha, amongst all the kind of chaos, felt in this happiness. So I guess that's the thread that's carried me all the way. It's, it's a possibility of a bit like you're saying in the sadness, being actually having this deep well-being and heart that does not tremble, does not shake. So yeah.
And we have quite different, there are a lot of crossovers for us, but quite different family of origin. And I'm, Willa's speaking of suffering there, and I'm thinking, I look back on my childhood with great happiness, and thinking about your Buddha Rupa. The first Buddha Rupa that I saw as a child around that age was the reclining Buddha. And for me, there's that sense of just relax. Just absolutely was what I picked up at the time. I wasn't aware that was the Buddha going into Nibbana, mind you. But that sense of, wow, that's a really powerful statement of just fully relaxing, being fully at ease. And I took that with me, that sense in Buddhist practice, that it's not about grinding your teeth and striving with will in a way. It certainly takes effort, but there's something about the relaxed ease that stays with me from that first Buddha Rupa. It was massive as well, of course, so it had quite an impact.
And my mother was very, very upset when I went to the monastery, and I said, well, it was all your fault. It was a kind of joke to her, because there are in this backwater, but we had onions and this Buddha Rupa and David was on the wall. And I said, well, maybe if I hadn't grown up with these Buddhist images,
That's funny. Well, yeah, thank you both for sharing. A couple things strike me. One is, along with the globalization of culture and so many things, fashion and whatnot, there's also this idea of beings cultivating across lifetimes, being born into different forms and from different nationalities all around the world, and how lovely that is, So there's a sense of that. And also in Eliza's first memory that she shared, and in Willa's memory as well, they both remind me of the story of the Buddha under the rose apple tree. under a tree, as Willa was, surrounded by beings that loved him, as Eliza was in that temple, and that sort of natural, joy and presence that arose for him at a young age, and how even after 6 years of self-mortification and starvation, he could have that memory and see that joy was blameless. So it's striking to me how similar those memories are. And it reminds me of a memory in my life, where my mom took me to go see Pocahontas, this Disney movie, when I think it was just before my 5th birthday. And I just remember in the movie's depiction of these Native Americans being in the forest around nature. And in particular, when Pocahontas is speaking to this spirit that lives in a tree, this elderly, wise spirit, and just feeling, as Eliza called it, this washing over in the body of what I now recognize as piti, the sense of well-being and joy. And that memory too reminds me of the Buddha story under the rose apple tree. And, sort of going into our earlier discussion on the possibility of this path and the fruits that it has for us, I think for a lot of people, when they hear that story, at least I presume, when they hear that story of the Buddha's youth under the rose apple tree, there's a sense of, oh, wow, the Buddha had jhana or samadhi as a 5-year-old or whatever, whatever age. He's the Buddha, like that's amazing. And of course, there's some truth to that. But to me, it really speaks to how natural all this is and how human
That's
this
right.
path is. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's an organic unfolding. That's
And,
right.
and our body remembers. That like when I was saying about sitting under the Baldy tree decades ago, my body knows what it's like to sit there. At the Axis Mundi. It's so powerful, as the Buddha describes it, that you can reconnect with these deep embodied memories. And we know trauma has that's one of the challenges, but the other gift is the body remembers these states of profound freeing up. And piti, joy, what it means to feel really well and in the right place.
I think that's so important in terms of one's own authority and all of that. Where does one get one's authority from in this practice? It's not from conferrals from on high, not from a knighthood. It is from embodied awareness. Yes, the body remembers the negative, and that's what we hear a lot about, but the body is where the awakening occurs. And I even remember another strong memory as a child when I was about 10 at a primary school in Canberra. So sort of a little nowheresville, little Catholic primary school. And we were, you would sit on the floor at the end of the day. We'd all have to sit up straight, and then we'd be watching the clock tick, 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 waiting till we could be released, And I just remember on this one day, the teacher saying, everyone sit up straight, nice and straight, upright. And once you're all like that, you can go. So of course I complied, and I sat up straight, and out of nowhere, out of my body, was this knowing one can become noble in this very lifetime. It was just straight off the body. A little kid in Canberra, never heard anything like that before in my life. This is the body in particular postures. And that's why the posture and postures can be so important, because they encode knowing that's not personal. That's not at all personal. And so, the emphasis in sitting meditation or in any of the postures of finding that kind of sweet place where there's a free flow of energy and it's an almost effortless posture. These are real supports. No, it's not a mind trip. It's a whole of being process. And so as we entrust to that and check it out, a lot unfolds through the body.
Yeah, it's so helpful. There's been a few things emerging in my practice over the last few months, and one of which is just taking this posture which I'm sitting in now on the floor in meditation, just the posture, something happens in the body that for me, I might question it if I get too analytical about what this might be, according to texts, but there's something in the heart that really knows, like, actually this is something quite important and quite special, and yet it's happening just from the posture. And your story actually really allows me to trust that more. And it's also quite striking to think of you as a child in that moment, to have that sort of come to you. It's so beautiful. And I have to ask one more question before we go on break. During that retreat, there was I remember it was related that Dhamma is energetic. And then this enigmatic phrase from the Buddha of Nibbana is touched by the body or in the body.
Yeah.
And I'd love it if you could say a little bit about that. And also if you happen to know the Sutta reference for that, I've been looking for it myself.
So it's in the Indriya Samyutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. I can't remember the actual number, I could get it for you, but the Buddha's talking about the 5 Indriya, which we mentioned earlier, and really begins with faith, and then how these other faith or conviction, Sutta, and how these other Indriya come into being. It's having a conversation with Sariputta, really. And then as the faculty, as the mind collects and knows deeply, there it arises this unshakable confidence in the whole process. Yeah? So it's this kind of circle, a deepening circle. And at the end of that, Sariputta says, again and again, one establishes mindfulness. Again and again. So the sense that this is a process that one keeps. It's not like you just do it like that, again and again. And then there's enigmatic phrases in there about touching Nibbana with the body. And it's so important because what it's pointing to is this is not an intellectual exercise. Can't think our way out of this predicament of misunderstanding. It's actually energetic misunderstanding. It's like, you've heard me go on all the time about this kind of uprightness in body, uprightness in the chitta, in the heart, the quality of uju. And most of the time we're leaning out, trying to get away from that, yeah? It's like we're out of balance, we're out of our strength. And so when the body energetically, when we're fully embodied, fully upright, yeah, we're fully capable. But we're not capable when we're leaning out, wanting that kind of grasping, trying to get away from. So it's about this energetic capacity that's actually about the whole thing. It's actually the chitta that's liberated, the heart, not the mind, the kind of mano, the knowing, kind of thinking aspect. Yeah. So it's the energetic process we're involved in. And that's why really knowing the breath as an energetic experience, the pranic energy of the breath, rather than as a kind of muscular function. And we start to realize actually breath brings in life, love, the whole, everything that keeps us being alive comes through the breath, builds the whole body. And that nothing more is needed. Yeah, so to keep, it's a powerful, it's an embodied process.
It's like in that, to the Buddha, to the Dhamma, to the Sangha, I dedicate my body and life, this body and life. And if you hear it at a superficial level, it could be like, I dedicate my life to the Queen or the King. It's like, when it's time to take up arms, I'll go forth. This is different, isn't it? And this is what Willa's describing, is that in action, dedicating body and life, because the breath draws in vitality and life essence, and we're channeling that to awakening. So we're giving all of that, not to thinking about the future or the past, but right here, right now, this energetic experience, this life energy is being channeled into awakening. So it's a full dedication that includes the body, and it's not just this little part of thinking mind that we think is up here somewhere, which is where a lot of people can run aground.
Yeah, and that's why, as you're talking, that like sadness you're present with, stuff starts getting freed up and
released
out of the physicality, really. And to not make anything of that, we just keep cultivating to have the capacity, the quality, the kind of right efforts, knowing how to be present, how to pick something up, how to put it down again, how to really relate to everything from a sense of love and kindness and compassion.
And that even when things feel like they're going wrong, it brings to mind that sutta where the Buddhas, where the assembly of monastics and Sariputta and Moggallana have died. I know we talked about this at the retreat you were at, Ranga. And this is also one of my favorite suttas because it's been so helpful to me. The Buddha acknowledges, to me, this assembly feels empty. These dear friends and teachers have gone. So he notices that, he feels it. But then he also says, but this has not taken away the capacity for virtue, for ethical living, for samadhi, for panya. That capacity resides here with each one of us, and that the whole beingness of it is possible even when we've lost our very dearest, when we're sad, when whatever's going on, whatever the conditions are, it doesn't rob us of the capacity to put one foot after another in this practice. That's how we touch Nibbana with the body.
Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. And if you want to learn more and get some free resources, check out my website, meditatewithranga.com.